I'm surprised no one brought up the famous Max Weinreich quote that I like to put on WAIS about twice, 3 times a year. What's the difference between a language and a dialect? Right. My wage slave and debt peon friend, John Turok. Right. A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. Another quick question, or another quick comment. I'm reminded of what I learned from Tim Brown about Alfredo Stroessner, the longtime dictator in Paraguay, that when he got stressed out, he would start speaking Guarani. Right. Which is that's certainly not a dialect of Spanish, but it's Paraguay being a bilingual society. We'll transition. Yes, Tim.
The question was what I need Colombian language and its accent. When I was there, it was spoken by the 95% of the population. So the dominant language is a population. A lot of people thought that we were supposed to obviously right. Well, his first language was Guarani, which is why we couldn't express his scripture. It's not at all amazing. At that point, I sat down with the president. I'm going to best no way I do simultaneously
There are a lot of Guarani jokes in Argentina, but I won't tell one. So this is a good segue to our panel on Cuba, and I know we're really behind schedule here, but I want to reassure everyone that we have about a 2-hour period before our banquet at 7 p.m. So we should have plenty of time for everyone to speak and to have some good questions. And really the whole point of this gathering is to talk about these issues and to get to know each other better. So I'm not terribly stressed about our tardiness. And having said that, we'll move on to Cuba. And we have 2 presentations on Cuba. First, we'll hear briefly, from Francisco Wong-Díaz, who will give us sort of an overview of Cuban developments. And then our friend Masoud Malek in the back recently returned from 25 days in Cuba. You have photographs, right, to show us? Yes, and he'll be telling us sort of what's going on in Cuba today. And after that, we'll have a discussion, a roundtable directed by Francisco. Francisco Wong-Díaz is from Cuba, and he is a lawyer who is now emeritus professor of law and politics at San Francisco State University. He's a good friend of WAIS, and he's also, I believe, the only newlywed in the room here. So I want to congratulate Francisco and his new wife, Bobby. I know her very well as well. Bobby has helped a lot with the catering here, and we'll be meeting her tonight at the banquet. So here's Francisco.
Thank you, John.
Roman, I sent you the link to your email.
Okay, while he does that, let's just get started.
Okay, 1 minute.
Okay. So, in 1962, a Miami Herald Pulitzer Prize winner, writer by the name of Andres Oppenheimer, wrote a very interesting book entitled,
Could you focus?
thank you,
And make sure it's on.
Fidel's Final Hour, Now, how many hours been since that time? So that tells you something about the inability to predict the future. Fidel Castro is 89 years old, and nobody's going to tell us that it is his final hour. The guy has been able to survive all this time, and some of the reasons for his survival, in addition to the fact that he has a longevity history in his family, is that they try to keep him alive by using all kinds of things. The last time I reviewed how they treated Fidel, there was this priest that said that they were using some sort of one type of scorpion, a scorpion that had only one pinch, and that scorpion was squeezed out of its juice, and they were using that to inject Fidel. I did not believe that until I ran to somebody in Marin County the same year, about 8 years ago, and her father was going to Cuba to get the same injections as Fidel. So that's how coincidental, how strange life is. So he has very good care, he has excellent health care, and if you read the book by his former bodyguard, a guy by the name of Juan Reynaldo Sanchez. Juan Reynaldo Sanchez just died in May of strange circumstances in Miami at age 66. He had been Fidel Castro's main bodyguard for 17 years, and he wrote a book entitled The Double Life of Fidel Castro. Basically, he charged Fidel Castro have been a drug kingpin. So we're looking at a very complex situation here. We think about Cuba and what's happening to Cuba in the future. Okay? Yeah. All right. So last month, September 17, 2015, Jose Cabanas became the first Cuban ambassador to the United States since the breakdown in relations between the United States and Cuba back in the 1960s. The United States has not yet appointed an ambassador to Cuba. Hopefully nobody's looking at me and saying, maybe you should go. But the important thing about this is, how did that come about? How did we go from an embargo since 1961, decades of Cuban-American bad relations, and now after 10 presidents, President Obama has now accomplished this? Well, I want to go over the history, but I'm going to tell you a few things that perhaps some of you, yes, need to be reminded. The breakdown occurred basically during the Eisenhower administration transition to the Kennedy administration. The Bay of Pigs, you might recall, was the failure of CIA paramilitary operation to try to invade the island. The failure of the Bay of Pigs, by the way, is the reason I'm here in the United States, because I left a few months after that. It took place right here. That's Playa Girón right there, and this Zapata Peninsula. That's where the invasion took place. Since that time, the United States adopted two open and one secret approach to the Cuban situation. The open were isolation of Cuba, and the other was, of course, the embargo. The third part, the secret operation, was something that was not known for a while, and was something that was basically done at the behest of President Kennedy's brother, Bobby Kennedy, and it was known as the Operation Mongoose, an attempt by the CIA to overthrow the system. This is important because if you move forward 10 presidents later, you find that Castro is still in power. Operation Mongoose failed. He survived. And not only that, you can ask the question, which is what this meeting is about: what about American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere? Does that prove that Cuba won and we lost, and our hegemony in the Western Hemisphere is no longer? Or is it just a side effect of the global change that we're now undergoing? So I'll leave that to you. But the background is this. It was secret operations that actually brought this about. If you look at what happened between the Obama administration and the Castros, and you have to talk about the Castros because two brothers not like this. They just operate as one. There was a Cuban who worked for the cryptology department of the Cuban intelligence service, a young Cuban disaffected from the regime by the name of Rolando Zarraf Trujillo. And he was passing to the United States information about the codes of the Cuban director of intelligence. And he was caught. Out of that came out information that led us to capture a number of Cubans operating in southern Florida, which became known as the WAIS network, and in Cuba they became known as the Group of Five. They became heroes in Cuba. And they were found guilty by American courts and sent to jail forever. So the Cuban government developed a tremendous worldwide propaganda operation to put pressure on the United States to release these guys. So when the Obama administration comes in, secret diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States focus on this aspect of the relationship. You have to let go of the Avispa guys. You have to let go of these guys because they were just looking at the Cuban exile network. They were not really doing anything against the United States government. But in reality, we're trying to penetrate the United States Southern Command, which is centered in Miami. And as a result, they were sent to jail. So what happened was that as of December 2013 or so, the Obama administration agreed to release two of these guys early. And then when the process was completed, the last three were released. And in exchange, we got this man back, Trujillo, who was not even an American. He was just a collaborator who gave us important information. And no one knows what happened to this guy. He just disappeared into the clouds. And we also got the release of 53 Cuban prisoners in Cuba. And also, we got back a contractor. Now, this contractor, of course, was working for AID. And he was trying to distribute internet access information in Cuba. He was accused of being a CIA operator, he wasn't. But he had a lot of people behind him, and this man, Alan Gross, was finally released in the United States, and that opened up the doors to further talks. And that's the background of this opening that began when Obama, on December 2014, announced that we were going to normalize relations with Cuba. Now, normalization with Cuba is going to be difficult when it comes to eliminating the embargo which has been there since 1960 for one reason. In the 1990s, two laws were added to the federal book. One, the Cuban Democracy Law, and the other was the, and I remember the name of the other? Helms-Burton. And these two laws basically said that there will be no restoration of normal relations until they have free and open elections in Cuba. There's democratization, and if you want to do that, the Castro cannot be involved. Now, Raul Castro said that he will retire in 2018. So not until 2018 can he really make any moves unless you eliminate the two laws. Okay, so it's going to be a while before the embargo is fully eliminated. So along the way, the Obama administration is going to have to do something like, make it easier for the changes that have taken place now to become more formalized. And what are the changes? Well, basically, let me just read them to you. There are basically rules dealing with travel and negotiations of economic activities. First, American travelers, and perhaps Masu can tell us about this, you can now use your credit cards and your debit cards in Cuba. Next, you can have insurance coverage for health, life, and travel insurance if you're visiting Cuba or you live in Cuba. Banks are getting better ways of authorizing transactions between Cuba and the United States. American companies can invest in small businesses in Cuba, and private Cuban companies can now receive building materials from the United States. So that's all for now. When it comes to the economic sanctions, beyond that, it's up to Congress to do so. So what can we say about Cuba? Well, when the Pope visited, you had some people kept away from the Pope. I don't know if you can see this, there's a guy being pulled out, trying to reach the Pope. And there were some ladies in white that were also pulled away. And this conference was the Human Rights Watch organization said about what's happening in Cuba. Basically said that they're still conducting arbitrary detentions. They're still arresting and torturing people who are opposed to the regime. So that civil liberties in Cuba are where they used to be before. That's why people complain that we got nothing in exchange for what we gave Cuba. The regime, on the other side, can be seen from a different perspective. There are about 11.4 million Cubans right now on the island. The life expectancy is 77.45 years. The Gini index for Cuba right now, which is the measure of inequality, is 38, already in the middle. Compared with other Caribbean countries, Cuba has a high level of development. It falls in the 59 out of 187 category in the UN Human Development Index. And yet, it presents tremendous development challenges after almost 6 decades of Castro. First, the main problem they have to deal with is food security. Tremendous problem. A lot of the food they eat in Cuba has been imported. Food security. 80% of the food requirements come from outside. The reason for that is that they have very low productivity in agriculture. So many of the countries are trying to help Cuba basically focus on improving agriculture. Next, Cuba has suffered and will continue to suffer from natural disasters. In 2008, a hurricane, a set of hurricanes actually, led to the loss of 20% of the gross domestic product. In 2012, Sandy hit the eastern coast of Santiago de Cuba, where you were, and it really made a mess of the area. The centralized political system is inefficient, and some people say corrupt. In the book by the former bodyguard, he says that the Castros are multi-billionaires, and he tells you a lot about how they live. But the main problem is that they have to build up the business practices. So countries like Canada are taking up Cubans and training them on how to become accountants and auditors and things like that, just to build up the infra and the superstructure they need to move beyond the level of development. In 2011, Raul moved towards decentralizing the economy more, to make it more market-based. And one of the things that they promised to do was to reduce the public sector by 1 million workers. Now that means 1 million people will lose their government-subsidized jobs and have to, take care of themselves. In 2013, a new tax law began to collect, lo and behold, income taxes in Cuba. People were allowed to buy and sell property. If you look at the UN initiative founded in 2000, known as the Millennium Development Initiative, it set 8 goals for the development world. Cuba has met about 4 of those goals. It has now universal primary education, 1 goal. It has achieved a move toward gender equality and promotion of women. It has lowered child mortality to about 5.82 per 1,000 live birth. and it has improved maternal health care. It has not met the question of HIV, AIDS, and malaria, and they have problems eradicating extreme poverty in the 5 most eastern provinces. That's where you were, Santiago de Cuba. So what does that tell us about the future of Cuba? Well, I'm not going to be like Oppenheimer and talk about the final hours of anybody. But my view is that you have a country that now has become very dependent on outsiders. Besides the food insecurity problem that they have, the economy depends basically on the relationship between Cuba and Venezuela. That's why people refer to them as Cuba or Cuba-Venezuela. 100,000 barrels of oil arrive in Cuba every day. So the subsidy is about $5 billion from Venezuela. Now Venezuela has tremendous problems. I don't know if you've been to Venezuela or seen what's happening there. They have the equivalent of how many? 14 marches and demonstrations every day in Venezuela, daily, because of food shortages and other things. So the Cuban agents present in the government of Venezuela, helping them to stabilize the country, helped to lead the crackdown that took place last year in Venezuela when people were marching there. And the reason why this is important to Cuba is that if Venezuela falls apart, then Cuba falls apart, because we won't get oil from them at those subsidy levels. Another problem you have is that Cuba has been trying to broker the end of the war between the FARC and the Colombian government, counting on that to also to help stabilize the border between Venezuela and Colombia. There's a lot of Venezuelans that have moved into Colombia on the borders, and that's creating problems between the 2 countries. So Cuba is trying to broker the situation in both countries. So, what to say about Cuba? Well, all you can say is that, who knows? At this point, I mean, you can predict, go ahead and do it. But all I can say is that as long as the countries are there won't be major changes. The Congress won't allow that. And another reason is that what somebody told me once, somebody who has a high classification level in the government, and it is that some people within the government of my age or older still believe the Castro has something to do with the Kennedy assassination. Until they are gone, the United States won't feel comfortable about completely having open relations with the country itself. They basically said the country belongs to the Castros. Unless those 2 are gone, nothing's going to happen. Now the Castros, as you know, chose somebody who's going to replace Raul. The first vice president of Cuba now is a guy by the name of Miguel Díaz-Canel. He's in his 50s. He's basically an apparatchik, a technician, not a charismatic leader. And should anything happen to Raul, he will replace Raul. So that's where I'll leave you.
All right. Thank you, Francisco. Since this is a panel.